What's the deal, my people? You know it is, Don Tony Teflon, and I'm back at you, another one. And episode 7 of Constellation just dropped, and I wondered to myself, could these people stick the landing? Hardest thing to do when making any type of book, movie, or television show is to make sure the ending is perfect. And so far, so good. This episode is titled Through the Looking Glass, which is a reference to Alice in Wonderland, and we have our own Alice, well, at least 2 of them that are definitely in the looking glass when dealing with this show. And they also figured out how to communicate with each other through a mirror, so that is another reference for the title of this show. So let me recap exactly what went down. A whole lot of blink and you missed it moments in this episode, so I'll make sure that you don't miss it when we go through this recap. Let's break it down. We start this episode off explaining exactly what we've seen in episode 1. We see Alice going out the window and looking for her mother. She hears her mother but can't see her. She goes outside and screams her mother's name, and Joe immediately turns around, hearing her daughter's voice. This is her actual daughter, not the one she brought to the cabin, but the one who is in a different dimension or timeline, no matter how you want to say it. Due to the fact that Alice believes that this was her real mother and she really did communicate with her, she puts on her jacket, she puts on her Moscow style hat, and she goes outside into the frozen tundra searching for her mother. At this time we see Joe, the Joe that we know, and the one that we see with the daughter that's not really her, talking about their Zoom session when Joe was in space. And when they listen to the call, she tells her that this is not what she remembers, that this is not how the call went down. She tells Joe that they were discussing the cow, but this Joe never had a cow in her universe, so this is tweaking her mind, confusing her how she was actually talking about this device. After this, we see Alice talk Joe into loading another tape. They have a few tapes in there, but this one catches her attention because of the date of the tape, and this should be exactly when she came back. While they listen to the tape, they can hear Paul's voice, and Paul saying that there's a dead body, and at this particular time, Joe realizes that it's Joe's body, and she forces Alice to stop the tape. Alice then asks Joe about the cow, and she explains to her that it's a device that captures quantum superposition, and it's about matter existing in the same place at the same time. And this is just for us, it's for the people who did not understand what they were talking about in an earlier episode when Henry said the same exact thing to Alice. It's Alice who figures out that Joe is not her mother and things aren't just the same, but they agree that the only way they're really going to figure this out is if they work together, and that's what they set off to do. We then see a fleet of cars heading out towards the cabin. We find out that it's Magnus, it's Frederick, and it's Henry, and they're all heading out there trying to get what they want. One wants the cow, the other wants his daughter back, and the other wants his lover back. Henry then spills the beans and says Irina is on her way. Why? Because Irina is going to be the one to take care of Joe. When asked why he is there, Henry responds with, the same exact thing happened to me. When we look at this scene, we could take it a couple of different ways. Number one, we know Henry is talking about Bud, but do they know he's talking about Bud? Or do they just think that he's went through the trauma that she's going through because they both were astronauts? And if we look at Frederick, he looks a little dastardly. He looks like he's either been briefed or he knew what was going on the whole time. We transition back to Joe and Alice outside searching for each other. We see from the first episode, this is the reason why Joe put the cow inside of the shed. As we see her looking for Alice, Alice is doing the exact same thing looking for her, but Alice is a little bit more distraught because at this time her mother's voice has faded away, but she stumbles upon a cabin, and it's the exact same cabin that she's been in, but this one has been set on fire. And we know it's the same cabin because Alice knows exactly where the key is because she reaches up and grabs it. When she enters this cabin, this is when things get a little bit tricky, so this is when we really got to pay close attention to what's going on. The first thing you're going to notice about this cabin is that the cat is alive in this cabin. The next thing that we notice is the painting. This is the combination painting from the guys carrying the angel to the ones with the changeling eating in the pot. At this time, it seems that Alice is familiar with the cabin, but it still does look different to her. She searches around the cabin, she finds her familiar spot, her little dresser. She goes inside the dresser, she puts her little lanyard on the outside of the dresser, but while she's inside, the door is snapped shut and she is closed, not just closed, but locked inside of this little cupboard. And then we see Joe go outside and continue the search for Alice. While walking through the snow, this leads her to the exact same cabin that Alice is hiding in, and she eventually does go upstairs and find her inside of that cupboard. Now, she's shocked that she finds her, and we've seen this scene from an earlier episode where she takes her back to the house and then gets a bath ready for her because her daughter's extremely cold and puts her inside of the bathtub. How they switch it up this time is the first time we've seen it from Joe's perspective, but now we see it from Alice's perspective, and then she's left alone in the tub, and then all of a sudden she's back with her father in the cabin, and her father does not believe a word that she says about finding her mother. Joe, back in the cabin with the Alice that's not her daughter, we can call her Blue Alice or Alice 2, whatever you want to call her, that you remember who she is, are going outside back to look for her main daughter. We see Magnus and his crew of posse make their way onto the lake, but they can't get through because both sides are snowed in. After this, they notice the beads, and this is Joe and Alice, that are left in the snow that were left by the previous Alice. They get into a confrontation where we see Alice, this is Alice number 2, Blue Alice in the blue hat, get upset with Joe. It's no coincidence that she has the blue hat and the red scarf on, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. They get into a fight, she runs away, Joe drops the cow, chasing after her. We then transition back to Alice 1. Her father is sleeping. Rule number 1, never fall asleep before your kids if you're a parent. We know that. But he does. She goes back outside looking for her mother. She had already found her mother. She knows it. She's determined to find her again. While she's outside, she sees the red beads that are left outside, and she starts to follow the trail, which leads her to the cow. We then transition back to Alice number 2, the one wearing the blue hat, and she finds herself back in the cabin, but the cabin is different. When she steps back inside of the burnt cabin, the first thing that we see that we know it's different is that the cat did not survive. Before we seen the cat was alive, now we see the cat looks like it has froze to death. The picture on the wall is, though, exactly the same as the other cabin. While she walks around the cabin, she finds the tape recorder. She grabs the tape recorder up, and then she goes back upstairs and she finds the cupboard. But this time, when she finds the cupboard, there's beads already left there for her. We then transition back to Alice number 1, who was outside the cabin once again. But this time, when she looks up, she can see the light from Alice number 2 in the room with the cupboard. When she walks inside the cabin, we can see that there are 2 cats here, not just one tabby cat and one black and white cat, and both of these cats are alive at this time. Alice number 2 then records a message for Alice number 1, which Alice number 1 then finds the message and then begins to conversate with Alice number 2. Joe is on the hunt for her daughter, and then she arrives at the cabin. We see Magnus doing the exact same thing, and they jump back and forth to both of them when they're both walking up the steps, showing that they're at the exact same time doing the exact same thing in the same cabin, but the cabins are on alternate realities. Joe makes her way to the cabinet, but there's no Alice, but we do have the tape recorder there, and she can hear her talking to the other Alice on the tape recorder, and the same thing is going on with Magnus. So now, we have to say that I did think there was 3 realities, but because there are 2 different tape recorders, both with the parents, and two different tape recorders, both with the Alices, we have to say there are 4 different realities going on in this situation. We then see Joe head out, but when she puts the lantern down, the wind blows open the door, causing the lantern to hit the floor and start the fire. Alice then asks the other Alice, can she see her? She stares into the mirror, and then they can see each other. So not only can they communicate with each other through the radio, they can also see each other through the mirror. After this, Jo heads back out onto the truck. She's driving, looking for her. She looks in her mirror. She sees that there's a fire, so she decides to turn around and go back to that cabin. As she goes back, we can see Magnus. Finally, they got a digger to get themselves out of the snow. He gets his posse together, and they go out there with the dogs searching for Alice and Jo. We then transition back to Henry, and while Henry is looking for the cow outside, we see that he gets a pain on the right side of his face. This is the exact same pain that Bud got. While he gets this pain, we also see a flashback of Henry writing a note to Bud. This is when they got into what appeared to be an argument back in the other episode. Jo makes it back to the house, but when she jumps inside, the house is not on fire. She has somehow transitioned in that jump into a different reality. Now, although Jo is not in the house with the fire, she can see the fire in the picture. When she puts her hand up against it to see if it's hot, it's not hot at all, but she can see the fire. We then see that the two cats are back, but this time the black and white cat is alive. The tabby cat, if it's a tabby cat, may not be, I don't know my cats that well, but the other cat is dead. Jo makes it upstairs, and she's talking to Blue Alice, and Blue Alice tells her that in order to speak to her daughter, she has to speak through her. She does so, and she has a communication with her daughter and tells her daughter that she will make it back to her. She just has to work things out. There's one important thing happening here, and I wonder if you picked up on it. If you did, congratulations. If you didn't, here we go. When you see Jo talking to Blue Alice, if you notice quick, she does not have the red scarf on, meaning that this is a third Alice. After Henry finds the cow, he is then swapped into the universe, which perceives to be his rightful universe. But it's not. It's the third universe. I talked about that in my last video. Go back and check it out. And he is transported right back to the moment when Paul gets shot. And he's devastated. Obviously, he knows Paul. When he talked to Bud before Paul, he had no idea who he was. Now, he gets swapped out. Bud gets put back in his place. Jo makes it back to the burning building. She pulls out Alice. Alice is unresponsive. She starts giving her CPR. She can see her real daughter while she's doing it, but she says she must save her. Magnus arrives. They save this Alice, which is the third version of Alice, Alice number 3. They haul Jo away like she's a psychopath. Then we see Magnus and Alice, this is Alice number 3, inside of the hospital. While she's there, she says, we're going to have to save my mother. While Jo was performing the CPR, we can see right in the left-hand side, it appears to be someone passed out. Now, this could be Bud, or it could be somebody else. From the coat, it does look like most likely that this is Bud. Why he's passed out in this position, I have no idea. It could have something to do with the cow. We also get the dream sequence when we see the Valia reappear and tell her that if she wants to see her mother again, that she needs to come with her. And basically, that's how this episode ends. I think a very strong episode. One of the strongest of the season so far, without a shadow of a doubt. But you tell me if there's anything I missed. Put it in the comment section. And if you like the way I do this, please thumbs up this, spread this across the realm, and of course, subscribe. And until next time, you know who it is. Peace and stay sexy.